Hello, everybody. Hi. Um, welcome, welcome. It is, what is it, Thursday now? Thursday. What a week. Oh, man. All right. Well, we're doing it. We're really doing it live. Just wanted to say thank you to, also, hello to everyone who it's Friday for. Yeah. I would be remiss. I don't know why I have like Fallout Boy hair right now. I just took a shower for the first time in like a week. So please be kind. I wanted to update you on Change a Life. There has been an incredible amount of support for this campaign. And I can't stress enough how grateful we are to all of you for the work that you're doing. You have raised over $123,000. Our initial goal was 100. Giles gave us a lot of information in a recent live stream about what that next stretch goal will do. So if you can, please spread the word. You obviously can donate and your teammates can donate, but we want you to get others to donate so that you don't have to be the one shouldering that. There are some really important groups that need our help there that are being targeted, and they're in need of resources, and we can support them. So please help us finish off that goal if you can. If you want to put it out on your social media, etc. You are changing the world person by person. So thank you for that. I'm really excited about today's panel. Accessibility and the conversations around accessibility and the importance of public spaces and what public spaces really are. It sounds maybe at a glance that it might be academic or maybe a little bit more specialized. It's not. It affects all of us, and it affects the places you live and the people in your place of where you live. So I urge you to pay close attention, and it's something that affects you. So without further ado, I've been talking too much. Everything's on fire. We should get to it. Jeremy, you are amazing. You are a librarian and lawyer. If I have that correctly, you're a librarian and lawyer, and you're currently pursuing a doctorate in UCLA's Department of Information Studies, where you are researching the public in public libraries, examining spatial control, which I'm interested to know more about what spatial control is, legal infrastructures of information, and how we can build more just and inclusive visions of both information access and the civic public. So you are also someone who's trying to keep your plants alive at home, and you love biking and things like that. You are a human being, but you are also doing some incredible research. It's so great to have you.
Well, shucks, it's amazing to be here. Speaking of here, I'm coming to you from the city of Los Angeles, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. I want to acknowledge that before we get started. Also because it's relevant to the discussion of public land and who gets to decide what's public and when it becomes public. This is unceded territory. But yeah, hi everybody.
It's so great to have you. And also as someone on Ohlone and Miwok territory, I wanted to acknowledge that as well. It's important that we talk about public spaces, but we also need to talk about how we treat others a little bit here. So you describe yourself as a researcher of, the public and public spaces. What do you mean by that?
It's, well, that's always a dangerous question to ask an academic. What do you mean by that? But I will do my best to rein that in. But anyways, well, I mean that the concept, the idea, the word, the public is one that perhaps we take for granted. It's just something that we attach to public parks, public schools, public libraries. And I think that it's something we need to look closely at, because the way that we organize those kinds of spaces, like schools, like libraries, like parks, and which people are allowed in and are not, tells us something about how we conceive of who is part of the public. Who's in, who's out, and who we see, whether we're talking politically or just socially, like who you wave to on the street, who you avert your eyes from, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and can you, so, the public space is supposed to be open to the public, but as you say, we sometimes say who is in and who is out. What are some examples of barriers that might restrict certain groups of people from accessing these so-called public places?
Sure. Well, there's a lot. Sometimes they're kind of hidden. Other times they're so overt that we don't notice them, or they seem like they're naturally occurring. But so, for instance, in public library spaces, and this is what I really focus on in my research, and when I was working in public libraries for 4 years, roughly, the Santa Monica Public Library System, to be precise. But like in public libraries, there will be rules and regulations, usually called like codes of conduct or behavior rules, that kind of thing, that are used to it's the right way, to control the space, to say, like, what kind of actions will get you removed from a space, or like asked to leave, or have the police called. And very often these things are, they're called behaviors, but more often they're like conditions. So like hygiene rules show up all the time in public libraries across the United States, saying these kind of vague standards of, offensive hygiene will cause you to be asked to leave the library, things like that. And those only tend to affect people who don't have regular access to laundry or bathing, which is, none of these things will say we don't want poor people or the unhoused in our libraries, but that's the effect.
And how do these, you're studying this now, and we may have some sense of how do these barriers emerge? Are they the result of like poor planning and a lack of public consultation, or are they intentional, like all the above?
It's, as with everything, it's all of the above. But they're intentional. And they're sometimes, well-intentioned. But they're these, like, when they are intentional, they're rooted in a notion of the public that is very much like a middle class, able-bodied, housed public. Like that's taken as the default. So they're usually intentional, but what they might not be, the unintentional part might be the assumption that everybody that the norm is this able-bodied, housed, middle class person. That's where the unintentional part comes into play, and that's why I research it and want to talk about it, because I think we need to recognize the assumptions we make. It feels like such a specific rubric for how we treat people, and what is like where we provide compassion and openness and where we don't. It feels very transactional. Why? We could say GISHers are a kind lot. They're a good group of good-hearted people. So we may already know this inside, but why does it behoove us as a society to, address and remove these barriers that are put up? Well, there's so many reasons, but I think the most important, the most pressing is that when these barriers are designed to keep undesirable people away, to make them go away, or at least to make them not visible. They're not designed to address what causes the problems, whether that's high rents or lack of access to healthcare, or any number of other things that can cause someone to become unhoused, for instance. But these barriers stop us from seeing people as people. Like they become problems. They turn them into problems as opposed to people. And for another, they stop us from really focusing on the actual problem, which is what these barriers are a response to, but are just not willing to deal with.
Yeah, I think these stopgap measures obviously are dehumanizing people. Obviously, they're also limiting the way we look at society, and it's interesting too. There's a lot of studies, I think in San Francisco where I am, about children being in areas with the unhoused, and like the sort of humanizing that happens when they're, around people in different sort of contexts and circumstances, because that they are seen more as humans rather than they don't exist and they're invisible and I don't want to participate.
It's, yeah. I mean, like with the children example in particular. So in Los Angeles right now, there is a municipal rule called 41.18 that is currently being expanded in the city, which prohibits sitting, lying down, or sleeping on sidewalks. But it's not the entire city, but they have decided that like it should be enforced within a 500, I'm not sure how many feet, but 500 or so foot radius around schools. What this misses, I mean, for one thing, is exactly the sort of humanizing potential that comes from not hiding poverty from children,
Right.
but also the fact that there are tens of thousands of unhoused children that are affected by this, who might be sleeping in their car near the school because that's the way you can get to school if you're living in your car. Anyway, so I just wanted to point that out. There's this, again, like these rules don't get at the actual issues, and they don't see people in the totality of their being.
So also, if you have questions for Jeremy, please use the Q&A button or box there. We'll have a little bit of time to dedicate to some questions. One question that I keep seeing kind of come up is Tobias asks, what can we do to make public spaces more accessible and inclusive? I mean, this is a big question, but how are there ways that we can help support? How can we do this?
That's a great question. It's the one I was hoping people would be asking.
Yeah, we're already on
it. Well, I mean, so it's kind of a twofold process, I guess. Like, one is is doing sort of the internal work of thinking, of questioning your assumptions about people, and recognizing that these sorts of laws, or I've seen people in the chat mentioning like things like like bars being put across park benches, people can't lay down, things like that. Like recognizing that that there are no laws that just are. There is no built environment that just is. It's always been a result of choices. And once you start thinking about that and realizing that people made these choices, you can push for different choices. And it's part of why I wanted to talk to you all. Is like a lot of this stuff is really achievable, like to changing things. I mean, there's a ton of vitriol surrounding that 41.18 law in Los Angeles I was talking about. It's a huge thing, but smaller issues like the park benches, like rules about hygiene in libraries, things like this. These are very actionable. So they're small scale, and the folks who are involved, like on parks commissions or library boards and that kind of thing, are not professional politicians. These are generally people who care about their community and will listen to you. So the answer that was a long. Academics don't give short answers. So the answer to that question is find like the local civic organizations that actually make these decisions, that write these things, and lobby them. I mean, it sounds trite to say democracy is the answer, but it works.
And it works even better when we're engaged at the local level. I mean, we're learning that every election cycle, it bubbles up more and more how important local elections become, because it changes the nature of a lot of different things within the community. Public spaces, these districts and lines like these. This is where the sort of ground war is being fought, right? I think your biography says that you study the decarceration of libraries. What does that mean?
It means different things to different people.
But here we go. Yeah. That's on me.
So literally, decarceration is just the opposite of incarceration. So it's a process of removing people from what are called carceral spaces, which are prisons, jails, oftentimes like hospitals that have involuntary commitment. If you're having a mental health crisis, like places like that, or what used to be called asylums, we don't really have many of those anymore. But in any event, so that's literally what it means. But I'm emphasizing that it's a process, in part because carceral thinking and decarceral thinking are sort of orientations that our cities, at least in the United States, have been built around. What I mean by that is that the answer we have to problems is the police, and then putting people away, like making them go away.
Right.
So decarceration is a process of shifting your mind away from those kinds of solutions, and first off imagining what else could be, and then doing it. But this applies everywhere, like including in libraries, like in library spaces, all public library spaces anyways, all staff members are trained, it's in the manuals to call the police. That's the ultimate solution they have. Like Los Angeles Public Library a couple of years ago announced a new budget in which they actually had $10 million allocated directly to the Los Angeles Police Department. Like that's the level that these things are embroiled at. I was part of a group that spent several months lobbying the library board of the Los Angeles Public Library to change that, and it actually worked. Again, I emphasize, focus on these small civic organizations. Your voice makes a huge difference, especially if you're part of the public generally, like not a specialist, that kind of thing. Like that's what really matters. So that was kind of two answers in one. How did I do?
I mean, it's a great start. I think,
Okay.
I think we have a few other questions here that are coming in now. Actually, a number of questions. Marion asks, our library system is soliciting input on what we want a new library building to be. So you have an opportunity here. Any suggestions that you might have for someone in that position who can influence what a library might become or need to be in some way?
That is fantastic. And generally, I want to point to like the specific, the historical moment we're in. Lots and lots of, particularly indoor spaces, but institutions generally are being reconfigured in response to COVID. Hopefully in response to monkeypox, but I haven't heard much discussion of that.
Yeah.
But we'll table that.
Yeah.
But anyways, so this is a moment where lots of things are changes are being discussed. And specifically like with this new building that you're talking about. So the specific things that are cheap and easy and would remove massive barriers, especially if we're talking about poor people, the unhoused, are things like storage or bathing facilities and like anything like that. That would make a huge difference. Like what you see in libraries across the country are prohibitions usually on bringing large bags into the library, which only affects one class of people. Like often there'll be cutouts in those rules for things like musical instruments. So you can bring a cello in, but you can't bring a backpack with all your worldly possessions in it.
Right.
If there was storage, then that becomes a non-issue. It's like, it just could be lockers, it could be behind a desk. There's so many, like easy and cheap. One of the biggest problems in the country is the lack of public restrooms, and those that are accessible, like in places like public libraries, are heavily monitored, and you're not allowed to do things like bathe yourself or bathe your clothes, which would address the hygiene issues. So there are, you could have a designated like washroom. There's lots of things. They're often so obvious that we don't think of them, but really having a place to put your stuff and a way to clean yourself removes so many barriers.
So and not even getting into the judgment of someone who's I've met very wealthy people who had terrible hygiene. So it's an arbitrary rule, and it makes me honestly, hearing you say that, want to bring large bags of stuff in just to prove the point. And then when they try to shoo someone out for that on that point, like it's the arbitrariness of these things is so obvious when you start to break it down on what the criteria are.
Well, the arbitrariness, and also so to use a specific example, Santa Monica, and other libraries do this too, but Santa Monica Public Library has little plexiglass like boxes, like you see at TSA checkpoints at airports. You know, like does your luggage fit in this? Other thing, does it fit? Great, you can go on. Always got to check it. It's a similar deal for bags you're supposed to bring into the library. And on top of the box is a flyer saying, if your bag doesn't fit, it's okay. There's a storage facility 17 miles away in downtown Los Angeles. That's the solution. But when you see the solutions, you realize that the point of these things is to make people go away.
Yeah, prophylactic rather than actually supportive. There's been questions too in the Q&A about public art. We're talking about education. There's public art too as a resource. Are you involved in any of those discussions, or is it mostly about libraries and those kinds of public spaces?
I'm mostly involved in trying to expand and preserve bodily access to public spaces. Okay. What was the specific question about?
Are you involved in public art at all? You know, art and education. Sometimes public art has barriers as well that limit a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there, we get into questions of disability, as well as poverty, which are often linked, very, very often linked. But that's not an area of my expertise. But I'm going to go learn more about it.
Yeah, I mean, so we have a devil's advocate in the audience. I don't know if we want to take that up or not, but and there are lots of resources, to go read more on these things and the why we should care and what we can do. So if you're in that boat, go ahead. We're gonna list those in a little bit, but this will be our last question. So I live in an affluent neighborhood, and this is actually good. We're gonna get this out for a second here. My neighbors would just throw money at any problem to make it disappear, not just the unhoused. It does work here and there, but how do I make my neighbors understand that we need to help people, this group of people, and not just sweep them away, and not just be, that it's a bleeding heart liberal sort of concept, so that they'll listen?
Yeah, that's the hardest one. Yeah. It's really hard. And there's lots of approaches. I mean, the one that I find most successful, well, first off, realize that this is not going to be a one-time, not going to be solved in one conversation. Whatever got these folks to feel this way took years. So if you really want to change someone's mind, you have to commit to them. And in part of that becomes, in caring about them, you also have to care about why they are concerned about this, why they have decided that this unhoused person is a problem and not a person. There's a reason they think that. It might be rooted in some nasty assumptions, but you got to hear them out. Start there. Take seriously that they have an emotional response to something, and once someone feels seen, then you can actually start to talk about the world outside of them. Usually when someone's responding to poverty, it's they're responding to something inside themselves first. Yeah. And that's, once you get that addressed and shown that they're cared for, then you can move on to the larger discussion. But it's a long process. Yeah. When we can find that sort of purpose, is it caring about the neighborhood? Is it what is this rooted in, and trying to get underneath it? It's a long process, depending on the person and depending on the topic. Yep. So we at GISH obviously want to help support the work that you're doing to make equitable change here for everybody and in these public places. Let's see here. So if everyone can go ahead and learn more about Jeremy, you can follow him on Twitter, obviously. And what else are you working on these days? What's the latest? Well, we're Right now, I'm working on my written qualifying exams to advance to the next stage of PhD work. So mostly I'm reading a lot and furiously typing. But there is a longer term project that we just some colleagues just got a grant for through UCLA from their School of Social Policy, which we're calling the Decarcerating Public Libraries, and we're going to be putting together some workshops and materials to help library workers and folks in the community who are want to work on this. We're going to make them publicly available on a website. So if you can be there in person, great. Otherwise, it'll be on the website for anyone to use for free. That's like 6 months away. But
Nice.
In the meantime, I'd like to take a second and highlight sort of the extreme ends of an anti-public library, which are prison libraries. They're a weird thing because prisons ostensibly are a public institution. So technically these are public libraries. And indeed, like San Francisco Public Library does library service all around the Bay Area, for instance. But there are some groups that are trying to support, oops, sorry, hang on a sec. My clock chimes for me.
It's a sign, everyone. It's a sign.
I'm the kind of person that has clocks that chime, more than one. Anyways, there are some groups that offer support to librarians who are trying to do work in prisons. I mean, ultimately, it's decarceration is the goal, but while people are still in the building, we want to give them information access. Information access in prisons is incredibly difficult and expensive. To get access to like a tablet. Some prisons have tablets now, but you'll pay like $1 a minute, which is a ton if you're in prison. And increasingly, this is applying to phone calls with family, even like letters. So I'd like to throw, if I throw something in the chat, will that show how does this
work? If you just make sure it's to everyone, and then we'll be able to send it there.
All right.
And we're going to do our challenge in just a moment as well, everybody.
Yeah. So these are 3 groups. There we go. The Prison Library Support Network, which is based in New York, but works with prisoners all across the country. The Prisoners Literature Project, which is also nationwide, and the Friends of the San Quentin Prison Library specifically, all do amazing work. All 3 of these groups have wish lists, book lists through Amazon or through independent booksellers of stuff that they're trying to get copies of to distribute in prison libraries. Often these libraries are highly regulated in terms of what books are allowed in there. So like the stuff on these lists are approved and it can go and are in demand. In particular, the Prison Library Support Network also does reference by mail, which because again, internet access or even access to dictionaries in prisons is really difficult. I don't know if folks saw there was an effort to remove Spanish language dictionaries from certain prisons because they were viewed as dangerous. Anyways, the PLSN, the Prison Library Support Network, will answer reference letters from prisoners across the country. That's where you can get, you don't need to be a librarian, you can get involved in it. They have trainings. You can also like send them $1 for stamps. Stamps are expensive. But yeah, if you have cash, you help these folks out, but also those Instagram accounts linked to websites that are full of resources if you want to learn more about this stuff. They're great organizations.
In fact, it's funny you mentioned that. Random Acts, a charity that we work closely with a lot, has earmarked $50,000 in grants of up to $50 right now. So if you go to those sites and you go look for those wish lists and those supplies and those resources, go apply to Random Acts right now. Go apply for a grant to provide an act of kindness and send it their way and start filling libraries with books, resources, supplies. Go for it. So go check it out. That's a great resource to supply. Thank you, Jeremy. All right, are we ready for the GISH challenge? Let's do this. All right. 1 second. Okay. All right, so let's get this party started. So, too many public spaces. This is image or video, sorry. Too many public spaces aren't really public at all. Demographic or socioeconomic barriers limit accessibility of some public spaces and facilities in discriminatory ways. Let's do something about it. Find something in your neighborhood that is supposedly public, but not truly accessible to all, like park benches with those annoying bars so you can't lie down on them, which makes them inaccessible to people experiencing homelessness. Innovate a way to resolve these secret barriers to entry, or write a letter to City Hall asking them to fix it. Post your solution to social media and tag librarian Jer on Twitter, only there, but use hashtag GISH, okay? That is 31 points. So it's up to you. So tomorrow, sorry, I'm just trying to do 200 things at the same time. Tomorrow, we have Lily Hevesh with us, an amazing domino creator. She's a young woman who does just mind-blowing things with dominoes, a huge creative and an inspirational personality. If you need a little lift in your, like an uplifting moment in your life, come watch tomorrow. We are going to have a lot of fun. Jeremy, thank you. Thank you so much.
This was great. I'm so glad from the engagement from everybody. I'm excited to see what you all go out and do in your local communities.
We are too. So yeah, go follow Jeremy and his work. Go follow the links that were here in the chat. We'll put those out elsewhere as well. Go apply for some acts of kindness through Random Acts, randomacts.org. And we'll see you tomorrow for our panel with Lily Hevesh. Thank you.